NBA unicorn by design is the ultimate prototype, the perfect build for a modern prospect. Guard-like handles, perimeter shooting, the body of a center, and none of the traditional limitations that come with it. These players shouldn't exist. Guys like Victor Wembanyama entered the league already fitting the mold and looked like weapons capable of reinventing basketball as we know it. But for every Wemby, there's a long list of others drafted for their size, tools, and upside who flamed out spectacularly. Because chasing unicorns comes with a price, drafting for potential is like walking into a casino with your franchise on the line, and more often than not, that unicorn you're banking on turns into a donkey. Today, we're digging through the wreckage, the failed experiments, the broken dreams, and the living nightmares, and very few fit that mold better than Thon Maker. Now, things were always just a bit different for Thon because he was a Sudanese refugee, initially seeking refuge in Australia, but where things were very different for Thon was in his 7-foot height at just 14 years old. He was discovered by talent scout Edward Smith, who had found gold in a couple of Sudanese prospects beforehand and was taking Thon Maker under his wing to get him noticed by all the right people. Thon would move to the US where his basketball career would go from promising to bad shit insane. Thon Maker became an overnight celebrity when his sophomore Ball is Life mixtape dropped, and it's easy to see why. Thon Maker was beating shots into the stands with a 9'3" standing reach and a near 40-inch vertical leap. But way more than that, there was a smoothness to him that made him special. In the way that you see Kevin Durant move in a way that can actually compete with other wings, Thon Maker had what looked to be a similar thing, of course, to a lesser extent. When he was attacking the basket, it wasn't just abusing his size. This guy was utilizing his steps efficiently, tiptoeing around guards and bigs, and finished with balance and soft touch. I mean, this guy was an offensive weapon. Really, in one crossover, this guy could go from one wing to the other in a fluid motion. His jump shot was super consistent, no real wasted motion, and either from deep or pulling up the mid-range, this guy was disgustingly efficient. From a no-name kid in Australia to a Ball is Life legend, Thon Maker rose the ranks to the number 2 prospect in his entire draft class. Now, Thon Maker was really just getting started with 22 points, 13 rebounds, and 4.5 blocks a game. Both a State Player of the Year award and state championship already under his belt, Thon Maker went from dominating the local scene in Louisiana to dominating the top prospects in the world at Orangeville Prep in Canada. Number 1 prospect Harry Giles caught the work, Dennis Smith Jr. got absolutely torched, but this is when things started to get a little funky when it came to Thon heading to the college level. By no means was he not ready. I mean, he had offers from Kansas and Kentucky, but reclassified to play 1 more year in high school after being technically graduated. As after his senior season, he was technically 1 year withdrawn from high school and NBA draft eligible, where this guy decided to throw his name into the hat. Projecting NBA talent is hard. Projecting someone with a ceiling like Thon is harder, and projecting someone that scouts didn't even get to see is pretty much impossible. It's clear Thon had a high ceiling from the high school lens, but really, when it comes to how the scouts looked at him, they weren't sure what to think. Despite garnering a ton of hype throughout his high school career, there's a sense that he has been intentionally hidden from NBA draft evaluators. While the combine exhibited his high-level run/jump ability, he really struggles to explode when he meets contact. Thon had a game perfectly crafted to the high school reel that garnered him the buzz and attention to get him into this position. But as far as the scouts were concerned, they weren't sure what else he had. He can spam pull-up jumpers over other centers that are 6'5", and he can spank shots into the stands against kids who now sell houses for a living. But with just a few games in Canada to justify his hype, something felt off about this. And just hours before the draft bells rang, things became 100 times worse. Jake Fisher tweeted out just before the draft bells that several teams stated they had no interest in Thon Maker whatsoever due to a conspiracy he may be as old as 23, not 19. A video of Thon Maker's face in a 2010 yearbook in Australia surfaced, showing that Thon Maker was in his early to mid-20s, claiming to be a teenager, and when pressed about the issue, Thon's response just made him look even worse.
The stories we heard today about your age and the questions about whether you're 19 or how old you are, what is your response to some of these allegations?
I didn't have a response for it because I know it's not true. And if it were true, it would have made me angry somehow, or made me sideways somehow. But I know it's not true. And obviously, that's why. Obviously, it's not true. That's why I didn't get to be.
Now this guy's nervous as shit about something. To be fair, draft night is an enormous moment. Cameras flashing, mics in your face, I'd be crapping my pants a little too. And a video of a yearbook can be altered with very few other resources coming out to further validate these claims since. But when taking all these pieces into account, let's see if we can't piece together an alternative timeline. Now Thon Maker did meet scout Edward Smith around 2010, but instead of discovering an up-and-coming 8th grader, Thon Maker was an unskilled senior graduating with no professional future. That Smith discovered and forced back to 8th grade with no real birth certificate from back in Sudan. Now this timeline is certainly a bit of a stretch. This is all speculation, but using our brains a little bit, the fact that Thon grew 0 inches from 8th grade to the draft, and the fact that Smith specialized in giant kids from a country with little to no age verification is a little head-scratching. Fast forward to the US, and as a 20-year-old sophomore in high school, Thon is taking the world by storm. After transferring to the US 1 year into his high school career, this allowed for 4 years of high school basketball with no college basketball required to sneak into the NBA draft. I'm not alleging that this story is true, but with multiple teams pulling out, it certainly seemed at least possible. And with a lot of uncertainty around his play, if he truly did have 4 less years to improve his game, this really was a major hindrance to his draft stock. After being mocked as low as middle of the 2nd round, Thon Maker shocked the world, or rather, the Bucks did, taking this guy 10th overall in the draft. Now the Bucks developed Giannis, so I guess they were feeling high on themselves, but very quickly, reality settled in when it came to Thon Maker. Thon would put up just 4 points a game, highlighted by his 38% three-point stroke and flashes of shot blocking ability. Note I say shot blocking, not rim protection, because any physical guard, wing, or post player could have their way with him, forcing a foul or an easy bucket around the rim. His handle really wasn't too great, honestly. Getting the rock in this guy's hands rarely ever led to much or anything, even when isolating other fives. And really the only attribute he added to the game too on offense was just knocking down catch and shoot 3 balls. And by his 2nd season, even that ended. Dropping to under 30% from 3, Thon looked like total shit, scoring 4.8 points per game in 17 minutes of play. Really, everything that scouts worried about with him was correct. When he was in high school, being a jack of all trades was his greatest selling point, but that was against high school kids. None of his skills were really to the NBA level. Despite being able to shoot and handle the ball above average for his position, this didn't really matter when he couldn't really meet the core positional requirements. This guy was too weak for the NBA, flat out. He got babied inside defensively and couldn't finish strong offensively. I mean, as a big, he couldn't handle basic big man duties, and if you moved him out towards the wing, actual NBA wings were eating alive their Thon Maker matchup. He couldn't keep up with them at all. The scouts were worried, but even worse than that, what they feared the most really turned out to be correct. With the added risk of drafting a player who could be in his mid-20s, Thon Maker was so much closer to his ceiling if these rumors turned out to be true. And although, again, never verified, this completely turned out to be the case. There was no statistical or physical improvement in his game whatsoever throughout his 5 years in the NBA. I know at this point, the name Thon Maker is somewhat of a distant memory to most, and the age scandal was just a niche piece of the NBA iceberg, but every day that passes seems to only validate the biggest mystery of that draft. After $12 million in career earnings, and a career that left more questions than answered, Thon Maker might be a bust, he might be a failed unicorn, or he might be a successful con pulled off by a corrupt scout sitting on the beach somewhere. Now if you're watching this, there's a 90% chance you're not subscribed, so make sure you hit that button for me. We're trying to hit 100k by the end of the year, and I appreciate all you guys watching. Now Dragan Bender is a name that once stirred curiosity and excitement among NBA scouts and fans alike. Not only was his name cool as shit, but as a 7-1 prospect with the agility and skill of a guard, Bender was hailed as the next unicorn. Now he had all the typical signs. He moved like a wing player on his feet, he could shoot the ball very well in Europe, and facilitated at what was expected to be an elite level for his position. At a time where guys like Karl Anthony Towns and Kristaps Porzingis looked to become the next faces of the league, Dragan Bender was the perfect complement to add to the mix. But in reality, Dragan Bender was doomed from the start. Born in Bosnia and raised in Croatia, Bender was immersed in basketball from an early age, following the footsteps of his older brother. He faced tough competition early on, playing against older kids, but soon distinguished himself with natural talents and a very unique style of play. At just 12, he moved to Split, Croatia to join a basketball academy. There, Bender's development accelerated. He wasn't yet the towering figure we'd later see, but as a tall point guard, he built an unusually versatile skill set. By the time he turned 15, Bender was playing professional basketball for KK Split, modeling his game after Croatian great Toni Kukoc. Bender began drawing serious attention, especially after breakout performance at the 2014 FIBA U18 European Championship. Older competition never scared him, but even more so, competition his own age just felt so easy. Despite being tall, Bender had to play up where he was never able to dominate off of pure size, and that forced him to adapt where where he could survive at that level. At just 16, the near 7-footer displayed advanced ball handling from playing the point guard his whole life, playmaking the half court off of all type of actions, and perimeter shooting off the catch or off the bounce. With monster stat lines like 34, 14, and multiple blocks and steals, scouts were mesmerized by a teenager with guard skills and legitimate NBA height. Bender's rapid rise led him to sign with one of the top clubs in Israel. Despite playing limited minutes, which is common for young players in the Euro leagues, he showed enough flashes to maintain a lottery status leading into the 2016 NBA draft. His draft profile was filled with promise. Just given his size and shooting ability, it was the hope that he could immediately serve as a stretch big while developing the rest of his already advanced skills to dominate the NBA. But don't get anything twisted. Dragan Bender was the ultimate gamble in the 2016 draft. The cons of his game were very surface level, which really shows added risk because the scouts hadn't scouted him enough to really understand his weak points and what kind of prospect he actually was. As you can expect, his strength and physicality were questioned as an NBA 4 or 5, but really the biggest scare with Bender was the uncertainty. Not to say physicality doesn't matter, it certainly does for a big guy, as not being able to do big man duties certainly accelerated Thon Maker's exit from the NBA, but in the case of Dragan Bender, we really knew very little about him. Despite being mocked top 5, most people didn't know a damn thing about his game, and the scouts who saw him didn't know much more. His game and his draft stock was almost solely about potential than proven production, but in the time that unicorn big men were the next big thing, the fear of missing out struck the Suns big time. The Suns, eager to add more talent after drafting Devin Booker the year before, decided to roll the dice. I mean, it would have made for a cool young core if all went well. With Booker and Bender starting to rebuild strong and Eric Bledsoe still on the roster, a franchise that historically, of course, loves to run and gun, this looked like personnel capable of that kind of play style. Well, things did not go that way, to say the least. The gamble backfired quickly. Bender's rookie year was very forgettable. In just 13 minutes per game, he shot a miserable 27% from 3 and 35% from the field. Oh god. He lacked aggression, confidence, and physical readiness. Teammates even noted how timid he seemed on the court. By the end of his first season, he was already being labeled a bust. To his credit, Bender improved in his second season with increased minutes. His three-point shooting rose to 36%, and he had flashes of competence, including an 11-game stretch where he averaged 10 points on 42% from 3. However, those glimpses quickly faded. In his third season, Bender's shooting cratered again, and the holes in his game and poor rebounding, limited finishing ability, and defensive struggles became more glaring. I mean, his offensive game was really his selling point, and when he's playing this unconfidently, there was nothing he could do to buy a bucket. Realistically, he could shoot, but his whole life he wasn't just sitting in the corner. He had no idea how to find a role in the NBA. When it came to his ball handling, sure, it was fine for a big guy. It was better than Thon's, but he wasn't necessarily quick-footed and kind of got boxed up by other rim-running bigs with 10% of the skill set. He couldn't take it to the post and get an easy one because he was too weak. Even just finishing dump-offs he was pretty shitty at, and in the pick and roll, he didn't have the foot speed or the verticality to be a lob threat. All while his offensive game was imploding, his defense, which was already kind of expected to be suspect, was as advertised. To put it bluntly, Dragan Bender was nowhere close to an NBA player, let alone one worthy of the 4th overall pick. The Suns let him go, and he found a short-term opportunity with the Milwaukee Bucks, though it led to a stint in the G League and eventually being waived. A brief 10-day contract with the Golden State Warriors gave him another shot, and he looked decent in limited action. Unfortunately, the pandemic cut that season short, and Bender never played another NBA game. In hindsight, Bender was a victim of a hype cycle driven by the NBA's obsession with stretch bigs. The success of players like Porzingis created unrealistic expectations. Even in Croatia, people were surprised by how highly NBA scouts regarded him. He was never the finished product he was made out to be, and in most drafts, he likely wouldn't have been viewed as a top 5 pick. When Bol Bol was drafted in 2019, there was a little debate about who might become the biggest steal of the draft, and it didn't take a genius to see why. His production at the high school and college level was almost unheard of, especially for the son of the tallest player in NBA history. Coming into the league, nobody questioned Bol's talents. A 7'2" center who could handle the ball like a guard, shoot over 50% from 3, and move with genuine agility. That's a dream build. The only thing that pushed him down draft boards was fear over his long-term availability. But fast forward to 2025, and even when he's healthy and waiting for his number to be called, it it's obvious that Bol Bol's career has fallen far shorter than anyone could have expected. Like a lot of kids, Bol grew up idolizing his dad. Although Manute Bol's days ended before Bol was born, by the time he was old enough to understand basketball, he realized his dad was special. At 7'7", Manute wasn't just a towering presence. He was a humanitarian, giving back millions to his native Sudanese people after a decade-long NBA career. Manute's on-court impact was equally unique. He remains the only player in NBA history to record more career blocks than points. But after being accused of being a US spy, he was forced to flee Sudan and return to America, where Bol's own journey in basketball would truly begin. Bol didn't just inherit his dad's height, he inherited the spotlight. By 10 years old, Bol stood 6 feet tall and was dominating youth basketball leagues in Kentucky. And unlike most oversized kids who rely solely on height, Bol was doing it all. Since he was always forced to play against older kids, he couldn't just post up and throw in hook shots. He had to actually develop a handle, a jumper, and perimeter skills to survive, and it paid off. It was unique. I mean, his dad of course had that one game that lived on forever where he turned into prime Steph Curry, but all in all, this guy was less skilled than his son by the time he was like 10 years old. Bol eventually transferred to Modern Day High School, a powerhouse program where he blossomed into one of the top players in the country. By his senior year, Bol was drawing comparisons to a taller Kevin Durant from Bleacher Report, ranked the 4th best player in the 2018 high school class. He had arguably a higher ceiling than Zion Williamson. And I mean, if you're a taller Kevin Durant, whose ceiling is topping you? With a near unstoppable combination of size, shooting, ball handling, and agility, Bol looked like the most unique player in the world. His game had all the flash and polish you could ask for. Standing at 7'2" with a 7'8" wingspan and knocking down over 40% from his threes at the Nike Hoop Summit, Bol had scouts drooling. Early mock drafts projected him as a top 5 pick. However, there were some concerns too. Big men with perimeter skills often shine in mixtapes, but flame out in real competition. Bol was disgustingly smooth. He could legitimately handle the ball better than just about every big guy in the world, but actually applying the skill is another thing. Was Bol going to be the first Wembanyama, or just another Dragan Bender? Those questions only grew louder after a short but spectacular college career. In just 9 games for Oregon, Bol was ballin'. He put up absurd numbers of 21 and 10 and nearly 3 blocks per game while shooting 56% from the field and a mind-blowing 52% from 3. His efficiency was ridiculous, but just as quickly as he arrived, he was gone. A devastating foot injury ended his season, and the fears about big men with lower body injuries, already an NBA front office nightmare, sent his draft stock into free fall. Even worse, whispers about his motivation and work ethic surfaced. Really, it seemed like the gamble was becoming riskier day by day. By draft night, Bol's slide was shocking. From a projected top 3 to top 10 pick, he fell all the way to 44th overall. While it made sense, teams were scared of injury and attitude concerns, it still looked like highway robbery for whoever got him. After all, even an 80% version of Bol Bol was worth a shot, and landing with the Denver Nuggets felt perfect. They'd already turned one second-rounder in Nikola Jokic into one of the best players who's ever lived, and had the time and resources to throw him without needing an immediate boom in the NBA. But the situations were completely different. Jokic entered a rebuilding team where he could grow without pressure. Bol joined a contender with no time to waste on projects. He spent the 2019-2020 season in the G League, and didn't make his NBA debut until the bubble games, where he flashed enough talent to leave people wondering why he wasn't playing more. In limited minutes, he averaged 6 points, 3 boards, and a block per game while shooting 50% from the field and 44% from 3. It was enough to keep the hype alive. Coach Mike Malone explained the reality. Bol was too inconsistent to trust in a playoff rotation. The Nuggets didn't have the luxury to let him play through mistakes. Over the next 2 years, Bol's role shrank even further, averaging just 5 minutes a night across 2 seasons. His field goal percentages dipped to 43% from the field and a miserable 25% from 3 in 2022. The flashes were there, but so were the glaring weaknesses. Bol's motivational issues became more and more obvious. He later admitted himself he didn't work as hard as he should have with Denver, and when you looked at his game, it showed. Yeah, he could block shots sometimes, but defensively he was a liability. He lacked discipline, struggled to guard the post, had poor footwork, and often made terrible decisions. His help defense was fine given how much distance he could cover, but one-on-one he was getting cooked, while his mixtape moves were nasty and his actual effectiveness was low. The Nuggets eventually traded him to the Orlando Magic in 2022, and for a brief moment, Bol shined. Given real minutes on a bad team, he averaged 12 points, 7 rebounds, and 1.4 blocks per game, shooting 58% from the field and 39% from deep in his first 32 starts. The buzz around Bol was back. but it didn't last. Over the next 33 games, he completely collapsed, playing just 16 minutes a night, shooting 47% from the field and a disgusting 8% from 3. The Magic, a team still trying to figure out their identity, ultimately waived him. Even a rebuilding team didn't want to invest in Bol Bol anymore. The issue was clear. Bol plays like an AAU player. His game is built around flashy crossovers, Euro steps, and pull-up threes, but that style isn't sustainable over an NBA career. Clearly, given the runs he's gone on in the NBA, when compared to the Dragons and the Thons of the world, Bol Bol's in another class. He's better than both of them. But when the shots stop falling, he doesn't have the fundamental tools to fall back on. His tunnel vision, poor decision-making, and laughable defensive effort made him impossible to trust. No amount of handles or mixtape highlights could cover up the basics he lacks, and having him on your roster just makes you feel a little unserious. Bol found himself glued to the bench with the Phoenix Suns, where his contract has just expired, leaving him as a free agent. Predicting his future is pretty tough. On one hand, he's still young and more talented than most end-of-the-bench players, but on the other hand, the NBA is ruthless. Bol is running out of chances. If he finally commits to playing with the system, defending, rebounding, moving the ball, he could carve out a career, maybe? But right now, the odds are pretty against him. In 2003, Time magazine introduced the world to a mystery, a young towering figure from China named Yi Jianlian. Allegedly just 16 years old, Yi was hailed as the next Yao Ming, or so they said. In reality, the only things that Yi and Yao truly shared were their heights and their country of birth. Yao was already a force dominating the NBA with power and poise. The hype machine roared, largely fueled by the actual Chinese prodigy that was dominating the NBA. In China, Yi became a phenomenon almost overnight, leading the Guangdong Southern Tigers to 3 straight championships. He grew into a 7-foot, 250-pound dog that was agile and smooth, with dazzling footwork and a knockdown jumper. The myth of Yi only grew louder and louder until the NBA had no choice but to listen. In 2007, in a draft class stacked with names like Kevin Durant, Al Horford, and Mike Conley, the Bucks used the 6th pick on Yi. It was supposed to mark the beginning of a new era. Instead, it became the beginning of a slow and painful unraveling. First came the whispers. Similar to Thon Maker, Yi wasn't 19 as advertised. Chinese media reports suggested he was actually 22, 3 crucial years older than the Bucks had believed. I mean, these Bucks couldn't catch a break, man. In a league where potential is gold, this revelation turned excitement into immediate doubt. The Bucks thought they had drafted a teenager with time to develop. Instead, they had a grown man who still needed years of seasoning. Then came the embarrassment. Unlike other prospects, Yi refused to work out against college competition. Scouts were invited to a private session where he ran drills against a folding chair. At first, it sounded like a joke until it was confirmed years later to be absolutely true. In the most important addition, Yi wasn't tested against other athletes. He was tested against cones. And if that wasn't enough, Yi didn't even want to play in Milwaukee. His agent waged a public campaign to get him traded, arguing Milwaukee was too small of a market for endorsements or fame. The Bucks, desperate and humiliated, refused to budge. The owner even flew to Hong Kong to meet Yi's family, pleading face-to-face to convince them. Eventually, Yi signed, but his heart was never truly there. For a fleeting moment, it looked like hope. Early in his rookie season, Yi faced Yao Ming in a historic matchup watched by over 200 million people in China. Yi scored 19 points on 7 for 12 shooting. This guy was ballin'. A few weeks later, he was named Rookie of the Month for December. For a moment, it seemed like the dream was real, but the consistency never came. Yi floated around the perimeter, settling for mid-range jumpers. Nearly 60% of his shots came from inside the three-point line and out of the painted area, and he rarely attacked the paint. In China, he could overpower defenders. In the NBA, he was out-muscled and outmatched. His rookie season ended with disappointing averages of just 8.6 points and 5.2 rebounds per game, shooting a mediocre 42% from the field. Worse, a severe knee injury ended his year prematurely. In 2008, the Bucks moved on, trading Yi to the Nets, and the pattern repeated itself. Flashes of promise were there, but they would be crushed by a brutal cycle of injuries. A broken hand, a sprained ankle, an MCL tear. Every time Yi began to rise, his body betrayed him. After brief forgettable stints with Washington and Dallas, Yi's NBA career was over after just 4 seasons. Returning to China, Yi reclaimed his greatness. From 2012 to 2020, he dominated the CBA, averaging 24 and 11 per game, winning championships, finals MVPs, and restoring his name as a national hero. In 2016, he made one last NBA comeback, signing an $8 million deal with the Los Angeles Lakers. He impressed in training camp. Coach Luke Walton even called him the team's best shooting big man, but just days before the season, Yi was waived. The comeback was over before it fully began. I mean, Yi was pretty shit, but it's hard not to compare him to Thon Maker due to the mysterious international age concerns. Yi was ass, but also less ass than Thon, who I could have posted up and dropped 40 on at 6'1", but nonetheless with expectations set at Yao Ming, Yi was a catastrophic disappointment. Skal Labissière. Now, that's a name you probably haven't heard in a while. Once considered one of the best prospects in the country back in 2015, Skal had the world at his fingertips. ESPN ranked him as the number 2 player in the nation, while scouts and Rivaled had him at number 1. As a high school junior, he faced off against Karl Anthony Towns and dominated him. Whether it was at the Nike Hoop Summit or Kentucky's preseason combines, Skal didn't just stand out. He looked like a player who could step into an NBA game that day and hold his own. One scout was starstruck after a workout, said Skal looked ready for the league right then and there. Everything pointed towards stardom. He was tall with arms at the floor and moved with the fluidity of a ballerina. So, what exactly happened? Skal's journey started in Haiti, where from a young age he was already far ahead of his peers. In 8th grade, he was suiting up against high school varsity players and dominating them. Coaches and scouts were mesmerized by his combination of height, touch, footwork, and mobility. But again, how much attention can you really garner in Haiti? When tragedy struck in 2010 with the devastating Haiti earthquake that destroyed his family's home, Skal and his family relocated to the States, and instead of shrinking from the adversities, Skal attacked the opportunity. He learned English from scratch, won a state championship, and quickly became a national sensation. ESPN's Matt Remsburg marveled at his come-up, writing that in just 18 months, Skal had built a life and resume most kids could only dream of. Big praise for a kid who had just emerged from the cracks of disaster. By the end of his junior year, Skal had it all. Kentucky's John Calipari didn't just offer him a scholarship early, he compared him to Anthony Davis, one of the best prospects that Calipari had ever coached and really one of the most talented basketball players to ever play. Some scouts even threw out comparisons to Tim Duncan and Hakeem Olajuwon. I mean, you can't ask for better praise. The hype around Skal was insane, but when you watched him, it did feel justified. He looked like a man amongst boys, effortlessly dominating with polished post moves, a smooth-looking jump shot, and elite defensive instincts. Add in his relentless work ethic and his inspiring backstory, and Skal seemed destined to take the basketball world by storm. And really, this was an easy guy to cheer for. He was set to actually be one of the unicorns to take off at the highest level with a 2nd overall ranking in his high school class. However, not everyone was completely sold. Eric Bossi of Rivals.com offered a rare note of caution. Right before Skal's arrival at Kentucky, he wrote that while Skal had incredible potential, it might take years to truly see if it ever comes together at all. At the time, it sounded like pessimistic and even ridiculous. Most scouts thought that Skal could have stepped onto an NBA court at 17 and put up buckets. But Bossi's warning seemed to be a glimpse into a crystal ball. When Skal arrived at Kentucky, things unraveled quickly. Early on, he had flashes of brilliance, like a 26-point game where he went 10 for 12 from the floor. That turned out to be the high point of his college career. Over the course of the season, his minutes dwindled. He struggled mightily against physicality, often getting pushed around, fouling all the time, and failing to rebound at the level expected. There were nights where he didn't record a single rebound, a damning stat for a 6'10" big guy. Eventually, he was benched in favor of a 3-star recruit, Derek Willis. Imagine, the number 1 prospect in the country losing a spot to some guy. By the end of the season, Skal was averaging just 6.6 points and 3.1 rebounds per game, with foul trouble and inconsistency haunting him every step of the way. His college career was totally shit, basically. Scouts who had once been so high on him now screamed their concerns. One NBA scout said the college game was simply too fast and physical for him, that he struggled to make decisions and lacked the strength. Another noted that he didn't seem to understand how to play with the team setting and that it wasn't a system issue. He just wasn't ready. Even John Calipari admitted that he may have mishandled Skal, trying to mold him into another Karl Anthony Towns instead of letting him develop in his own way. But at the same time, Calipari couldn't go out there and force him to bang around the glass and put on 20 pounds of muscle. Despite the disastrous freshman season, Skal declared for the 2016 NBA draft, hoping to help his family financially as soon as possible, which is pretty hard to knock him for, given where he came from. But in terms of extending his career in the NBA, this is a pretty easy decision to criticize. Skal had one go at college. It sucked. Okay, give it another go, get in the gym, and let Calipari adjust and put you in a better position. Again, I can't knock a guy who watched his house get destroyed by an earthquake for not turning down millions, but as a guy who would have loved to see him succeed in the NBA, I really believed it would have been better for him to roll into the league with confidence and a successful collegiate season under his belt. The Phoenix Suns selected him 28th overall, and immediately traded him to the Sacramento Kings, but Skal's NBA career mirrored his college one. Flashes of potential overshadowed by inconsistency and a lack of physical presence. Over 4 seasons and 148 NBA games, he never found his footing, bouncing between the NBA and the G League before quietly falling out of the league altogether. Looking back, it's clear Skal's story is a product of both environment and internal struggle. Despite his hard work and good intentions, Skal never had the physicality needed to survive the highest levels and lacked the IQ to play in the NBA whatsoever. With rookie averages of just under 9 points, Skal's potential even in the NBA was there. Again, he just lacked the physicality to be what he was supposed to be and was essentially unplayable. I mean, maybe with the right program, a bought-in team, and a bit of time, he could have been something, but in the same way that Skal was once the new shiny object, the NBA always finds a new one to replace the last. Aleksej Pokuševski for the OKC Thunder was maybe the most mysterious prospect available in the 2020 draft. A legit 7-footer who weighed far below 200 pounds, and the only footage scouts could see of him before the draft came from just 11 games in Greece's second-tier league. In that footage, it looked like Poku was playing against middle schoolers. None of the players he faced off were likely ever going to sniff a competitive pro league, and even then, he only made 40% of his shots. Despite the red flags, or more so the uncertainty, the Thunder just gambled, taking him 17th overall in 2020. Now, just 5 years ago, OKC was way different. At the time, OKC had no direction. They weren't a contender, they weren't even really on the rise that much. So although Poku was very raw, his ceiling was seen as incredibly high. Some scouts believed that with the right developments, he could become a great player. He showed flashes of potential with good passing instincts, a fluid-looking jump shot, and surprisingly agile movement for someone his size. Clearly Poku had a ceiling, but the odds of him reaching it were very, very, very low. 4 seasons into his NBA career, how has he done? His first 2 seasons were rough. As a rookie, he averaged just 34% from the floor, and even in his second year, he only bumped that up to 40, a number that was inflated by meaningless late-season games when opponents were resting their actual rotational players. In fact, in his first halves of games that season, he was shooting just 34% from the field. However, by his third year, it looked like things were starting to come together. Poku shot a career-best 43% from the field and 37% from 3, showing real improvements, but unfortunately would suffer a leg injury midway through the season, cutting short what could have been a breakout year. In his 4th season, Poku wasn't sniffing the floor. The reason is simple. Despite flashes of improvement, Poku's not ready. Offensively, his decision-making and basketball IQ are not at a level where he can help a team that's now aiming to contend. He physically gets manhandled like most guys we've talked about today, and even though he might toss a nice touch pass on a break here and there, it's after getting exposed to 5 plays prior. Watching him, you still get the sense like he plays in high school, doing what he wants rather than fitting into a team's system. After being waived by the Thunder and finishing the season with the Charlotte Hornets, Poku signed back in Europe, which really seemed to be inevitable from the jump. No one in their right mind assumed he'd come in and dominate, and as a lottery ticket type of talent, Poku was a fun possibility that seemed to have a pretty predictable trajectory. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, subscribe if you're new. We're trying to hit 100K by the end of the year, and as always, I'll see you boys in the next one. Peace out.